Podcaster Dan Bongino thinks he's a tough guy and he's going to pick a fight with Joe Kent. So he resigned from his role as deputy director of the FBI, Bongino did. And now he's going around saying, believe the government, there is no deep state. The government is so honest and wonderful. And don't look into Charlie Kirk's assassination. So him and Joe Kent went back and forth a couple times online. It was a good brawl. Anna's here to tell us all about it.
Yes. So what really stands out to me about this story is how Dan Bongino, who resigned from his post as deputy director of the FBI because he was getting a lot of backlash for his part in engaging in the Epstein cover-up, like he's been crashing out over Joe Kent merely talking about his experience serving as the Trump administration's counterterrorism chief. He said that he was looking into possible foreign ties into Charlie Kirk's assassination, and that was shut down, which is what led to Dan Bongino spiraling. So for context sake, I'm gonna go back and show you what Kent said, how Bongino attacked him in March, and then I'll show you the latest attacks. Let's start with the first video. This is Joe Kent.
What do you mean when you say we're not allowed to ask any questions about that?
We've been told that this individual, Robinson, is a lone gunman, and maybe he is. But the investigation that I was a part of, the National Counterterrorism Center was a part of, we were stopped from continuing to investigate. And the FBI will say that they stopped that because they wanted to turn everything over to the Utah state authorities. Everything's going to trial. It's very, very sensitive. But there was still a lot for us to look into that I can't really get into. But there was still linkage for us to investigate that we needed to run down. And I'm not making any conclusions. I'm not saying
no, I don't think you are.
Because of this happened. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying there's unanswered questions. We know the pressure because of the text messages that have been made public that Charlie was under a lot of pressure from a lot of pro-Israel donors. And again, we know Charlie was advocating to President Trump against this war with Iran. And we knew at the end of the 12-day war, at the end of Midnight Hammer, that the Israelis were going to come back and ask us to go back to war again.
So that was the claim that Joe Kent made. That was a mix of claims and also fact, because Charlie Kirk absolutely was against the war in Iran. And ahead of the 12-day war, he did visit Donald Trump and basically dissuaded him from engaging in a long, drawn-out regime change war against Iran. And honestly, it worked. I mean, the 12-day war, you could argue he still went in and did a little bit of bombing. However, we didn't get sucked into a long war until, of course, after Charlie Kirk was assassinated. And then months and months later, in February of this year, Trump is convinced by the Israelis that attacking Iran and carrying out regime change is gonna be a cakewalk. Trump does it, and here we are. How many months has it been? I mean, months and months later, we are still at war with Iran. The Strait of Hormuz is closed. The global economy is tanking. You guys get the picture. Now, immediately after Kent said that on Tucker Carlson's show, Dan Bongino was already on the attack in order to defend the FBI, defend the Trump administration, and attempt to pour cold water on Kent's claims. Take a look.
Charlie Kirk is killed publicly in a very horrific way, and we're not really even allowed to look into that at all.
Okay, listen, folks. This part I have to just leave here. This is some of the most disgusting, unethical, and immoral stuff I have ever seen. Leveraging the death of my good friend, his brutal murder, his assassination that the whole world watched in all of its horrifying gore. For your podcast appearance, you're disgusting. Thank you for your service to the country. You're also disgusting.
Charlie Kirk was one of President Trump's closest advisors, and he also advocated heavily against a war with Iran. He was in the Oval Office.
He did? That's fascinating, because I've had conversations with Charlie too. I don't talk about them because the man's dead and I don't like to invoke his name for podcast clicks, okay? Only to remember him. And I'm not gonna do it now. You sure that's how Charlie felt?
Okay, so right off the bat, Dan Bongino has no credibility whatsoever. And why do I say that? In regard to Kent's claims that he was shut down from investigating potential foreign ties in the Charlie Kirk assassination, all Dan Bongino did was appeal to emotion. He made no argument. He just called Joe Kent disgusting, and that was it. And then he immediately follows that up with one of the most brazen lies about Charlie Kirk I have ever seen. Because whatever you might think about Charlie Kirk, especially if you're on the left, one thing that is undeniable, because he was on the record repeatedly, he was against regime change war in Iran. He was vehemently against that. And I wanna just show you the receipts. Let's take a look.
Let's do some updates about Israel and Iran and potentially the United States. On one side is the Lindsey Graham, John Bolton types, where they are actively calling for regime change. Here is Lindsey Graham. This is just lunacy. This kind of analysis is not helpful. This kind of approach, this kind of argument, it has nothing to do with nuclear weapons at this point. This is now that we want to go all in and take out the regime. It's time for us to close the chapter on the Iranian Ayatollah and his henchmen and start a new chapter in the Middle East. And that sounds good, doesn't it? But what have we learned when it comes to wars, and especially wars in the Middle East? What you draw up on a whiteboard rarely happens. What you think theoretically is going to occur, there might be unintended and unforeseen consequences. Going to take out the Ayatollah. Oh, really? What comes next? What comes after regime change?
Okay, this story is wild. Trump reportedly left Turkey on a secret military flight after officials received intelligence about a possible Iranian threat. He was moved in a catering truck to another plane while Air Force One continued on as a decoy. Now look at how differently that gets framed. On the left, the focus is, wait a minute, you left a plane full of staff and journalists behind to act as the decoy? On the right, the story's mostly about protecting the president, secret security tactics, and Trump joking that it was basically a James Bond operation. They did everything but put in dun 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 dun. Now look, of course you protect the president, but if there was a credible threat against the plane, what about everybody else on it? I've covered politics long enough to know that sometimes the most important part of a story is the part somebody wants you to overlook. I want to be able to see that for myself. That's why I use Ground News. It puts reporting from across the political spectrum in one place, so you can instantly compare the framing, see the bias distribution, check the factuality ratings, and see who owns the outlets behind the coverage. Their blind spot feed also shows you stories one side is barely covering at all, because sometimes what gets ignored is just as revealing as what gets emphasized. Go to ground.news/TYT or scan the QR code to get 40% off the Vantage plan, the same plan we use. I absolutely recommend checking it out. Ground.news/TYT.
Might be, oh, well, we need a small number of US troops to support the new regime. We have seen this play before. Regime change, you have no idea how this is gonna work out. You have no idea.
And Cenk, those were just two examples of Charlie Kirk going on the record in various broadcasts and saying, I'm against the idea of going to war with Iran. I'm against a regime change war with Iran. He has said it repeatedly, and Dan Bongino flat out lied to his audience. Now, before I show the newest attack Bongino carried out against Kent and Kent's response to it, I want to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, so if you're trying to decide at home, well, okay, one guy's saying one thing, the other guy's saying another thing. How do we know who's telling the truth? Well, you know that Dan Bongino just lied to you and said that Charlie Kirk was for the Iran war. And you saw with your own eyes that's not true, but there's overwhelming other evidence as well, by the way. Texts from Charlie Kirk to Bret Weinstein that have been released where they talk about how they're desperately trying to stop the war, but the neocons want it really bad. If you don't know, some of those same neocons funded Talking Point USA to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars. And they didn't fund it for, Charlie to say that he was against the war. They funded it so that Charlie would say that he was for the war. Now, he wasn't following those orders. Now, there's one other thing that Joe Kent said there that Anna, that I thought to be very interesting, which was at some point he talks about how, there were other people who said that, talked about the Charlie Kirk assassination the day before he was shot and killed. And Joe Kent is saying those leads were not followed up. Well, I mean, if you don't follow up those leads, then my lead is that it might be you. right? And so if the government isn't following up on what either people who said that he was going to get killed the day before and is not following up on possible international connections, which Joe Kent has also talked about, then obviously I question the government itself. And what is the government? Who's the government? Who's making these decisions? So before I have to confess, and this is my apologies, guys, that I was dismissive of the idea of a deep state, but no, there's definitely a deep state. And they're making apparently these unilateral decisions, and I'd love to know who's in it, who's responsible for that. And of course, since Dan Bongino was in the chain of command that made those decisions, he's got every incentive to lie to you and say, oh, there's nothing wrong here at all.
And by the way, it's not lost on me that when it comes to really investigating the Charlie Kirk assassination and wanting answers about some of the inconsistencies that have come up, it's always the exact same group of people who defended the Trump administration in the Epstein cover-up. It's always the same group of people who are favorable toward Zionists taking over our foreign policy. It's always the same people. And honestly, that alone makes people suspicious about what's going on here. You know what I'm saying?
No, I do. So, I mean, look, I'll name names.
Pattern recognition is not allowed, okay? You're not allowed to notice patterns that are emerging again and again and again. But here's what I want to know to all the right-wingers who have fallen into the talons of the neocons. Don't pretend like you cared about Charlie Kirk, because if you cared about Charlie Kirk, if you wanted to get to the bottom of the truth and know exactly what happened, you would want a robust investigation. Instead, you're engaging in this effort to shut down any questions, any attention being paid to those inconsistencies. And it's just very suspicious to me, incredibly suspicious. And Dan Bongino built his reputation, his name, his fame on doing broadcasts about the Epstein files, doing broadcasts, wanting answers about these things. Then he becomes the deputy FBI director, engages in that cover up because once you're in, that's it. You have to acquiesce to the corruption. He got embarrassed and was like, oh, I miss being a podcaster, and thought that he would be able to quit and then restart his podcast with the same audience. But no one trusts you anymore at all because you're a phony, you're a fake.
Yeah, look, we're telling you what reality is. We're not telling you that we have some secret evidence or can prove who did it, right? So, but is it the same Ben Shapiro and Israel First guys who told us, oh, the Epstein files are not important? They're just, you gotta move on. You gotta move on from the Epstein files. And now they're saying, you gotta move on from the Tyler Robinson case. It was definitely a left winger. It's just one guy, just one guy, just one guy. Please move on. Okay, yeah, we are noticing that. That's weird. Like, why are those things even connected? Why do you all in unison have the same point about the Tyler Robinson case and the need to move on from the Epstein files? So it's strange. That doesn't prove that any particular person or entity did it. But I'll tell you right now, there's already a million question marks, and these are not like, oh, maybe kind of, well, can a plane fly at that trajectory? Can steel melt at that? No. There's a million gigantic, enormous questions here, right? For anyone paying attention. And so this Tyler Robinson case could be, country changing, planet changing. That Tyler Robinson case is not going to go smoothly.
No.
Yeah. There's going, the whole thing can unravel from there.
I just think, we've now seen multiple examples of evidence tampering, including, the SD card being taken out of the camera directly behind Charlie Kirk. Terrell Farnsworth, who runs audio and visual for Turning Point USA, took the camera down, took the SD card out. Initially, he claimed that he did so because he was worried someone would steal the cameras. But not only did he leave the camera there, taking the SD card and putting it in his pocket, he didn't even tamper with the other cameras at all. He didn't take the SD cards out of the other cameras. He left the other cameras on the set. Very strange behavior. But if you want more details on that, check out my interview with Candace Owens, because we walk through all of that with our audience. Now, with that in mind, I want to go to the latest attack. I do not know why Dan Bongino wanted to revisit this, but he did recently, and he decided to attack Joe Kent's claims by positing that his role as the counterterrorism chief did not give him authority to investigate what he wanted to investigate. Take a look.
One more. Here's a quick one for you. ChatGPT's like, in case you're stupid, it doesn't say that, but like, here in shorthand, FBI is the investigative agency with compulsory legal authorities. NCTC is there for intelligence fusion and interagency counterterrorism coordination. I was blocked from conducting an investigation I had no authority to conduct whatsoever at all. I guarantee you this, flags all over in the chat, guaranteed. If Joe Kent were to come out tomorrow and say like, I love the Jews and I don't hate Israel anymore, I guarantee you every single person telling you they trust him and is telling you the truth, despite the fact that he's obviously lying, every single person would turn on him and go, that guy's full of crap. He had no authority. Look at it, it's right there. And any AI system could tell you that. NCTC doesn't investigate anything. Can someone just ask Joe that? What exactly was your investigative authority?
Oh, I asked ChatGPT to tell me whether or not the counterterrorism chief has the authority to investigate potential foreign ties in carrying out an assassination of an American citizen on US soil. I'm gonna ask ChatGPT. Like, this guy thinks we're morons. So, and by the way, the other thing that I'll just note is, why are you bringing Jews up? Like, no one's having a conversation about Jews. Like, we're not having a conversation about that at all, but he decided to do that because that is the trick that gets played in an effort, it usually fails these days, luckily, in an effort to discredit the person who is raising, in my belief, a legitimate concern. Now, Joe Kent responded to him. Let's take a look at what he had to say.
NCTC analysts are a part of every joint terrorism task force throughout the entire country. The JTTFs are typically led by the FBI. NCTC's role within the JTTF is to determine if there is any foreign nexus. So that would be a foreign country, a foreign government, a foreign individual, a foreign company. If there's any foreign connection or nexus to an act of domestic terrorism, like the assassination of Charlie Kirk. So that's what NCTC analysts were doing as part of the JTTF to assist the investigation of the assassination of Charlie Kirk. So NCTC analysts were operating at the request of the FBI to determine if there was any kind of foreign connection or foreign nexus to the assassination of Charlie Kirk. NCTC was formed after 9/11 because of the failures of the CIA and FBI and their inability to communicate prior to 9/11. So NCTC has that unique role. That's why we're part of the JTTF. So at the request of the FBI, we were looking to see if there was any kind of foreign nexus or connection to the assassination of Charlie Kirk. In very short order, we were told that our services were no longer required, that we no longer had access to the repository the FBI had where all the information on the investigation was being kept. And then the FBI said shortly thereafter they were going to hand over the investigation to the Utah law enforcement.
And Jake, I went back to read some of the reporting on this because if you listened carefully, he said that at first they were tapped by the FBI to look into a possible foreign connection, and then in short order it was shut down. And I remembered that in the New York Times there was reporting about how Kash Patel, the FBI director, is the one who shut it down. I learned some other interesting details about what happened afterwards, including the fact that there was a White House meeting that included Kash Patel, Tulsi Gabbard, who's the person that he reported to when she was the director of national intelligence, Susie Wiles, JD Vance. So they're all there. And it was apparently so tense that very little got accomplished. The Counterterrorism Center gathered material from intelligence agencies about potential foreign ties to Robinson and has also looked at foreign funding of people who identify with the far left movement known as Antifa. And what's really interesting here is think about what the narrative was immediately after Charlie Kirk was assassinated. There was, in my opinion, based on the statements made by Trump administration officials, there was an effort to not only use his assassination to create division and rage between left-wing voters and right-wing voters. It was going to be used as, or exploited as an excuse to strip what they deem as left-wingers, strip their rights by saying, well, they're dangerous, they might carry out another assassination, that kind of thing, right? But it's just really interesting because when it comes to investigating Antifa and possible foreign ties to Antifa, Trump administration is all about it. When it comes to looking into whether there were any foreign ties in the Charlie Kirk assassination, well, that gets shut down real quick.
Yeah, so here's another interesting thing. Joe Kent never said a single word about Israel. Right, and the Israel First guys immediately come in and start bashing him, but he didn't say anything about Israel. By the way, when he said they didn't let me investigate a potential international connection, I mean, the press is constantly talking about how Iran is planning to kill Trump. So wouldn't your first instinct be like, oh, was it Iran? Oh, was it one of our adversaries? Was it Russia? Was it China? Was it Al Qaeda? Who was it? No, their first instinct was, Joe Kent's a liar. Oh, wait, that's super weird, super weird. And now what does Dan Bongino do? He comes in and he's like, oh, you don't remember Borat with the throw the Jew down the well? This thing that he did and making fun of anti-Semitic tendencies, etc. Now it's hide behind the Jew, right? So they're like, put up Jewish people as defense, but it's not working because most Jewish Americans aren't on their side. And by the way, now finally, a lot of Jewish Americans are getting sick of being used as like these props and decoys and they're like, why do you keep saying that we're in favor of a genocide? We didn't sign on to this. We're not Israelis, we're Jewish Americans. And why do you keep saying like, oh, when someone says, hey, maybe Tyler Robinson, we should do a bigger investigation, and you say, hey, they're anti-Semites, what the hell are you talking about? We didn't kill Tyler Robinson. What are you insinuating? What are you, nuts, right? Because this isn't about a religion. This isn't about Jewish Americans. This is about Joe Kent saying a foreign government might be involved. And he didn't specify which government. But now, when all the radical Zionists in the country shout, go on a witch hunt against Joe Kent at the same time, and then Dan Bongino starts using the old trick of, well, I'm not gonna debate any of the points, and I can't prove my point at all, but you're all anti-Semites. Well, we've all seen that movie before. That movie comes from the radical Zionists whenever they're trying to hide anything Israel's done. So am I saying we should look into Israel now? Yes, I am saying it. By the way, we should look into every foreign country that might have been involved. And what's funny about Israel First is always, they're like, no, we want special exemptions. Like if we found out there was evidence that Iran might be involved, would they say, no, you shouldn't look into that? Well, no one in their right mind would say, no, don't look into that. Or whether it was Canada or again, Cuba or whatever, we would all say, of course you should look into it. But they're saying, but if it's the allegations are about Israel, that's the one country you should not be allowed to investigate.
Yeah, and that's super convenient for Israel, which is a country known to assassinate people in sovereign countries and get away with it on a regular basis. So
they're kind of famous for it. I mean, if you say that they can't,
so just take the reputation. Take the reputation. You act that way. You earned the reputation. So where does a badge of honor and revel in it instead of pretending like you guys are so innocent and sweet? Oh, we're always the poor victims. You're not. You guys are assassins.
Yeah.
And we all know it. That's why people are suspicious. And it's also super suspicious that Netanyahu was all over US media on the day that Charlie Kirk was assassinated, talking about how Charlie Kirk was the greatest friend to Israel. Please.
Every time you ring the bell below, an angel gets his wings. Totally not true, but it does keep you updated on our live shows.